Okay, I'm still sat here with Marilyn Hedenborg-White, and who's from the University of Uppsala, where you're a graduate student. And we can talk about Wicca and Western esotericism. And the kind of last question I have for you is, where do you see the study of Wicca in particular, but I guess in general of Western esotericism, where do you see that study going? What's the kind of direction of travel for that discipline?
I think one thing that we're seeing in the study of well, if we broaden it a bit from Wicca to kind of paganism in general, is that the field of pagan studies is growing to focus more and more on things that aren't exclusively British witchcraft,
Right.
but also starting to take into account that there's a huge sort of pagan revival going on in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, where various kinds of pagan revivalistic religions are attracting a lot of followers, and that's something that's been kind of neglected in research compared to how much there has been on Wicca and witchcraft and that sort of thing in England and the United States. There's also, like, speaking in terms of sort of debates going on in the study of paganism, of course, is the huge one of insider versus outsider, which is has been kind of controversial, I think, recently, because a lot of pagans and Wiccans who are sort of studying their own religions feel that they are mistreated by outsider scholars who come in from the outside and can't really understand what they're doing, and they feel that they've been very sort of
Well, I guess that's kind of rehearsing debates that have occurred within religious studies over the last 100 years, where all these people who were not Hindus, not even from the same culture as traditional Hinduism, defining what it was and writing books saying this is what it is, these aren't proper Hindus. And just people do that about paganism, when I guess the early scholars of paganism, and so relatively recently, were almost universally practitioners as well.
Yeah.
So we've seen the kind of shift, and an uncomfortable shift for some people.
It is definitely so. Yeah, because then we have the other sort of branch of scholars on paganism who come in from the outside and who see, which I think is kind of justified in a way. There's also a sort of trend towards almost kind of writing pagan theology by certain pagan scholars, and who are sort of appropriating that kind of from anthropology, that sort of concept of the other, and that they are the other. Which is kind of, I mean, I can see where they're coming from, but on the other hand, they aren't colonized people. They haven't been persecuted in that way. They are academics a lot of the time who really speak the language and who know how to sort of express themselves. So I think it's kind of,
it's interesting.
It's an issue that kind of, it's really tricky, and it gets kind of emotionally loaded as well, because these insider pagan scholars feel that they're being attacked and that their religion is being attacked because of prejudice against pagans, while on the other hand, the people from the outside feel that they're just kind of
they're just
playing
kind of
the victims when
expressing a kind of devotional position that's mixed in with the scholarly one. That's rather kind of
and they use that to sort of justify doing something that's not wholly maybe academic.
It actually makes for lively conferences.
It really definitely makes for lively conferences.
The other thing you said there, which I thought was interesting, I didn't want to forget, was in Eastern Europe, the rise of paganism within those Eastern European countries. Is that linked at all with kind of neo-nationalistic uprisings as well? The sense of our people is free from the kind of previous kind of communist or kind of universalizing roles, and therefore there's a rise in various nationalist movements. Is that sometimes linked with these pagan feelings?
I think there's a small overlap, definitely. It does kind of arise out of a sort of shared cultural...
it's the religion of our people in some way that predates recent history.
Yeah, but that's definitely not to say that everyone that's reviving paganism in Eastern Europe is...
a nationalist enterprise.
No, absolutely not.
There's just some overlap.
Yeah, there is some overlap, I think. Another thing that's really sort of in the research on esotericism in recent years, which I think is really, really good, is that it's becoming more sort of aware of kind of... I mean, esotericism research it's a very new field, and it's had to... spend a lot of time and energy on trying to defend itself as a field and justify itself.
It's kind of legitimate.
Exactly. So there hasn't been that much time for kind of more sort of critical, analytical research that takes into account power relations and that sort of thing. And I think that's kind of up and coming now. There's there is a small number of people who are sort of taking into account gender. That's sort of one of the things that's on the rise, I think, in the study of esotericism, and also, which is really, really interesting and has been completely sort of neglected into recently, is the issue of race and ethnicity and how that kind of plays into esotericism and identities and that kind of thing, and also the ways in which Western esotericism is not exclusively a European thing, but also intersects with things going on the other side of the Atlantic, with the whole sort of various kinds of African American esotericism and the sort of the interactions between Afro-Caribbean spirituality like voodoo and that sort of thing, which of course draws hugely on Western esotericism, and that I think that's been kind of ignored.
It's very much an esoteric tradition itself.
It is. It definitely is. Absolutely. So I think that's sort of that's starting to change, and also an increasing focus on late modern and contemporary forms of esotericism, which were quite ignored until recently. I mean, like Crowley, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. So there'd be these huge gaps in the history of esotericism that just there've been insufficient scholars to actually get to grips with them.
Exactly. And I think the sort of younger generation of scholars is really sort of changing that and changing what types of issues people are looking at and researching.
So there's been a generation, I guess, kind of scoping the ground, making out sense of what the field is. Yeah. And now there's kind of this ground, but it's not populated with kind of, all the figures that we talked about.
Exactly.
And some of those issues, I guess, to do with gender and race. And I guess what always strikes me, working about the British context, is the lack of much discussion about class.
Yes.
Which when you actually go and spend time with, or talking to pagans, is actually quite noticeable. The kind of class profile of different groups is. It's quite clearly belongs to, and it's initial, isn't it?
Definitely.
So there's an awful lot of kind of work to be done there as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It would be really interesting to do more sort of quantitative research as well, that kind of surveys and that kind of thing, to just sort of map it out really broadly.
But I guess growth of paganism as well, which
definitely
we continue to see a pace, certainly in Britain, I think within Europe, allows scope for people to do that, and probably kind of broadens the amount of people who are involved anyway.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the opportunity for longitudinal studies starts to increase as you kind of get a profile of people that were involved, and that's changing quite a lot in the last 10 years probably.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, there is. There
Okay.
definitely is.
Thank you.
Okay.